Hi everyone, welcome to the launch of the Cavendish School and thank you for joining us. We're really pleased that you could make it. Before we get started, I'm just going to give you a quick run through of the event and then I'll be handing over to the senior leadership team who will be presenting about the school's journey and the plans for the future as well. We're then going to go to our question answers section of the event. So thank you to everybody who pre-submitted your questions. What we're going to do is prioritise answering those questions on this event, and if there's time we'll then move on to the live Q&A. Please feel free to send us any questions through the chat functionality. Obviously we are prioritising answering the pre-submitted questions. If we do have time we'll get to the live ones as well, but any ones that we don't get to answer we will collate those and answer them after the event too. Just so you are also aware, we're recording this event, so we'll be uploading it onto the school's YouTube channel so that you can watch it on demand, and we'll be circulating that along with some other people later this week. I'll admit somebody else while they're in the waiting room. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the school senior leadership team to give their introductions. So over to you, Ryan.
Okay, good evening everyone. I'm Ryan Kelsall. I am Deputy CEO of the Learning Alliance and previously Principal of Impington Village College. And we'll talk a bit more about the various organisations that are involved in opening this as we go through. And then I'll hand over to Leah.
Hi everyone, my name is Leah Cooper. I'm currently the Assistant Principal responsible for SEND students and pupil premium students at Impington Village College and also the SENCO at Impington Village College. But I have also been seconded to work with the Cavendish School in lieu of us having a head teacher.
Hi everybody, I'm Julie Bailey. I'm Chair of Governors for the Cavendish School. That means that I've been working in an advisory capacity to help the Trust to develop the best possible design for the school over the years that we've been planning this. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to talk you through how we got to the stage that we're at now. So very simply, the process of building the Cavendish School came out of meeting a need. That need was identified through the work of the local authority with the Morris Education Trust as it was then, and very simply the Free Schools programme provided an opportunity to put in a bid to build the school that was needed to provide places for children with autism in Cambridgeshire where there wasn't a state provision at the time. So by 2017 that bid had been successful, and what that means is that the funding was made available to actually go ahead and build the school. And since then we've been working on that process. So the process itself involves conversations. Those are conversations with the Department for Education, because it's their funding, on how best to use that funding, how to design a school that meets the needs of the children with autism whose needs cannot be met in mainstream education on the site that we have within this area. Now, those conversations also took place with educators around the country who were already providing really good quality provision for children with autism, and we visited those schools and we spoke to the children, we spoke to the staff, and we've also been speaking to families, we've been speaking to members of our local community, and we've been speaking to researchers in the field to try and design the best possible school that we can. So the school that we have now is designed with that in mind, and over those years. And the next slide will show you the team that have been working on this. So the trust that we're working with is now called the Learning Alliance, that's formed from a recent merger. The trust is the collection of schools, so part of the team is that trust which the Cavendish School will join and become part of when it opens. The other teams that we're talking about are a steering group that was in place when I joined the team in 2018, and that involves the Department for Education, it involves the developers once they had been appointed, and we've drawn on expertise when and how it would be useful to be able to produce the best possible design. The team that you're meeting this evening, that we're calling the senior leadership team, is this team that's in place before we appoint a head teacher. So that's Ryan, Leah and myself. So as we're taking you through the process, the trust is the Learning Alliance. The steering group we might refer to in terms of the design is this larger group that's been working for many years, and we form the leadership team. So Ryan's now going to talk you through where we're at now.
So I think it kind of positions itself nicely for us to start talking about where we are, and we're really excited that just today we received the confirmation from the DFE, the Secretary of State, that all of the planning has now been signed off, and we had developers on site today looking at the real logistics of how we're going to start the work in the next couple of months. The Cavendish is going to be a small self-contained school, so it will have its own campus, its own site within the wider Impington Village College and International College site, so that it will be co-located, but it will be separate and will be its own school in its own right. And the school will look to educate up to 80 young people with an EHCP that references an autism diagnosis from year 3 to year 13. And we will start by recruiting for in the autumn from September 2021, year 7 students, and then gradually bringing in year 3, 4, 5 and 6 students throughout the autumn of 2021, so that we'll have a cohort of approximately 40 students by January 2021, and then we will grow year on year from there, with a new cohort of year 3 students joining us in September 2022, and so on and so forth. Our aim is to provide really excellent educational opportunities throughout, and that's going to be underpinned by our vision for education, which comes from the work that we've done over a long period of time at Impington Village College. So we want to provide a safe and nurturing environment for the young people. We need them to enjoy their learning, and it's a real focus for us to develop their potential and ensure that they make good progress. And that has always been something at Impington that has been very student specific. Potential and progress are individual things, and the whole focus of our curriculum and what we're going to be trying to do is to ensure that each individual is catered for and that they can make that progress, thrive independently and emotionally and socially, but also make good academic progress. So we need to create a safe and nurturing space which is inclusive and also offers a wide comprehensive education offers, as well as the holistic approach to education that's going to focus on the social and emotional well-being of the students who join us at the Cavendish. Next slide, please. So where are we? Building work is due to commence on site in November. So we're hoping in the last 2 weeks of November that the work will begin on building the site. The site is a modular build, and some of you may be thinking, well, how are we going to complete the site in such a short, and the development in such a short period of time? A large amount of the school will be built off-site, transported onto site, and then built as a modular construction on the Impington Village College grounds. We've already begun the process with the local authority through the EHCP annual reviews to identify students who may attend the Cavendish School. And it's really important to emphasise that that is a process that has to happen through EHCP review, and it is the local authority who will commission the places at the Cavendish School. It won't be for me to decide, or the new head teacher who will come and join the Cavendish. That will happen through the EHCP review process and will be determined by the local authority. As I said, our plan will be to admit our first year 7 cohort in September 2021, and we will designate and repurpose an area of Impington Village College to support that very small group of students. And then they will be joined as we move through the autumn term on a very well managed and gradual transition process by years 3 to 6. So we will have that full cohort of year 3 to year 7 starting with us in January 2021, and then that will grow year on year as younger students join us. So I think the next thing for us to talk about, if Sophie would move us on, is about where we're going and what our curriculum is going to look like. And I think Leah is going to pick that up for us.
That's right. So we're very excited that we are planning to be the world's first international baccalaureate special school for young people with autism. So that means we'll be delivering IB or international baccalaureate programs and other accredited qualifications as appropriate as well. Of course, the individual students will also have their own kind of specific therapies and interventions that they will also need to take part in alongside that kind of broader curriculum. But we truly believe that the IB programs are going to be the most appropriate in terms of supporting the students to become globally aware citizens, make connections between their learning in the different subjects, and also to develop the skills and confidence that they need to succeed in the wider world. And part of the reason kind of behind this decision, I know Ryan's going to talk about this a little bit more later, but part of the reason behind this decision is that this is a program that we have chosen to also follow at Impington Village College, and we have done lots of research about that. We've been delivering it in sixth form for about 30 years, but we believe that that will help in terms of opportunities for students across both sites, across both schools. If the two schools are following the same or similar curriculum models, that allows a lot of cross collaboration and kind of cross working between the two different schools, which wouldn't be possible if the curricula were completely different. But of course that curricula will need to be tailored to the students in the cohorts that we have, and as they're going to be very small cohorts, that's going to be very, very possible and is very exciting. Could I have the next slide, please, Sophie? Thank you very much. So when students join us in Key Stage 2, they'll be following the primary years programme, so that is for years 3 to 6. And when they transition into Key Stage 3, so years 7 to 9, they'll be following the middle years programme, which is one of the programmes that's going to be starting also at Impington Village College from next year as well. When they move into Key Stage 4, so years 10 and 11, obviously we know that in the UK students are expected and kind of have to follow GCSE programmes, so we won't be following an IB model there, although lots of the same principles will follow through for the students. But the idea is that at Key Stage 4, so in years 10 and 11, students would be either accessing entry-level qualifications, GCSE qualifications, or other appropriate qualifications for their level of learning and progress in terms of where they're at that point in time. So broadly speaking, it's very similar to, in terms of academic level, it's very similar to the academic level you would find within a mainstream school. It's similar to the qualifications that we offer here at IVC. We have some students who might do one GCSE and a range of entry-level qualifications, and we have students who might get 9 or 10 GCSEs at a very high level. So broadly speaking, there is a range of qualification options that are going to be available for students, of course, alongside all of those bespoke therapies and interventions that would be required for the individuals. Moving on to Key Stage 5, again, a whole broad range of qualifications depending on the student's needs at the particular time. That might include BTEC subjects, but also the IB CP career-related programme and the IBDP, possibly with links to our sixth form that we have here on site as well, Impington International College. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you very much. So the idea really behind the Cavendish and in terms of the support that we're going to be giving the students, broadly speaking, is that we are very much looking at supporting the students on an individual level in the way that they need to be supported, and that will be very much a co-production in terms of speaking to the parents, speaking to the young person, speaking to any professionals involved, and coming up with an individual plan to support that young person. So we expect that when a student joins the school initially, that there will be a period of assessment, and that may be involving a number of professionals and a large team of people, of course, including the family as well. And that will then form the basis of the plan to support the student moving forwards. And that plan is going to be very different for individual students, and it won't be a kind of broad brush, everybody's going to do this or everybody's going to do that. We want to make sure that we're supporting those students' individual needs as individuals. And really the key thing about the school is the relationships between those young people and the families and the professionals involved and the staff that are working at the school. Can I have the next slide, please? So as you can imagine, alongside our kind of curriculum and teaching, there's going to be a number of therapies, interventions, and lots of different support that's going to be embedded throughout that school day. So we really want to have that support that the students need, whatever that may be, whether that's speech and language, whether that's occupational therapy, to be embedded throughout their time at school, not just a kind of a separate add-on. And we will be taking advice from professionals with regards to that. At this point in time, we don't have information about whether those professionals will be, when they'll be on school site, or how many hours they'll be on school site for, or whether they will be our members of staff, or whether we will be using local authority members of staff, because we want to have the cohort of children. We want to know the needs of the cohort of children that we have before we make those decisions, obviously, so that we can make the best use of any funding that we have. But we do expect that there will be a large kind of multidisciplinary team around the school and around the students that we can draw on. And as I said before, the key thing for us is making sure that every single student and every single family is really, really known by the staff at the Cavendish, in particular, obviously key staff who will work very closely with those individuals as they progress through the school. And I think making links with the community and with wider families and autism education and research is something that we're very keen to kind of push forwards with, and I know that Julie has lots and lots of ideas about how we can do that. Next slide, please, Sophie.
Okay, so I think just to give you an overview of where we are, as I said before, we're really excited that the development and building side of things is due to commence this month. And particularly exciting for me is that it means that I can move away from dealing with planning and those type of things and get back to something that I really signed up for when I moved into education, which was about delivering really fantastic provision for young people. And so we're extremely excited about the head teacher recruitment that we're going to start this month. Our aim is to secure an exceptional head teacher by the end of November, and with a view to them starting with us from April. And that will give them time to work with me to recruit a team who will come in and support them in that first year and really start to develop their vision of the curriculum. And it's important to say that whilst we are going to be an IB World School, what I'm looking for, what we're looking for as a trust, is a really outstanding head teacher who will be able to build a fantastic curriculum within that IB framework. So in order to be an IB World School, we need to bring in the candidacy and authorisation processes. And so we'll be doing that for the primary years programme and the middle years programme, ready for launch in September 2021 and 22 respectively. We won't be starting our candidacy processes for the IB Careers programme or the IB Diploma for a number of years, because obviously that will only come into play as students flow through the school towards year 12 and year 13. So the timing of our launch event today, it's almost like we planned it really. It has come right in the middle of, at the beginning of this week, finally having sign off and approval on planning and a date for the start of the development. And at the end of this week, us beginning the recruitment process for our head teacher. So it seems a really opportune time for us to be gathering members of the community together who have an interest in either supporting the school, working with the school, getting to know more about it, or having their children attend the school. And we've been really overwhelmed by the amount of interest that we've had, and lots of people have lots of questions. And I know Sophie has kind of got them, and I think she's going to read out the questions and then direct them to either Leah, Julie, or myself.
That's right, yep.
Great.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. So the first question is actually for you, Ryan, and I think we might have covered some of these in the presentation, but we'll just be delving into them a little bit deeper.
No problem.
So the first question is about the building work. So has permission been granted, and when does the build start, and could there be a potential opening date for the school confirmed?
Yeah, so because the school sits on a greenfield site on the edge of Cambridge, planning permission was granted back in early September by South Cambs District Council. That then had to be referred to the Secretary of State, who has to approve any development on the greenfield. We got confirmation of that earlier this week, and that went back to South Cambs District Council, who have now signed that off. And the final stage of that is that the Department for Education, ourselves, and the developer McAvoy will all formally sign the contract for the development within the next 10 days. So that's where we are. In terms of an opening date, we've agreed with the local authority that we will open for Year 7, because it's really important that they have a positive transition if they've been in a primary setting for September. And we're going to repurpose, as I said, a distinct and separate zone of the IVC site for that purpose. And then we'll gradually transition Year 3 to 6 across during the autumn term, ready for January 2022. And I did notice on the chat there that there was a typo that said January 2021. You're going to be sadly disappointed, unfortunately, if you try and join in January 2021. Even though it's a modular build, I'm pretty sure there isn't going to be a lot there at that stage. So yeah, that's the kind of process. And again, going back, we'll come back to it, but hopefully that will start to be discussed with START team workers and SEND case workers through the HCP review.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ryan. The next question is for Leah. So for those just going through the EHCP application process, why would you name the Cavendish as our preferred school?
Yeah, so to answer your question, if you are applying for an EHCP at the moment and you're being asked what your preferred school is and you would like to name the Cavendish, then yeah, that's absolutely the right time to be doing so, so long as the student has a diagnosis of autism. Having a diagnosis of autism and an EHCP are really the two only criteria in terms of what the school is able to accept. So yes, if you're going through the EHCP application process, then now is the right time to name the Cavendish as the preferred school.
Brilliant. And also, what's the closing date for applications for Year 7s?
So the local authority usually asks that Year 7s with EHCPs make their preference choices by the kind of end of October. So generally speaking, the end of October is the deadline that the local authority asks kind of parents to put forwards what their preferences would be. However, having said that, nothing's really going to happen if that happens in November, or if that happens a little bit later. They're not going to say that your child can't go to school. So ideally before the end of October, by that deadline that the local authority asks for, although we do very much expect that over the course of the rest of the year, the rest of the months and from January onwards, that there will be applications coming in throughout the year. So we aren't planning on kind of having a cut-off and saying that we're not going to consider applications after a certain point. It just is up to the local authority in terms of who gets the places or not. Brilliant,
okay. And another question for you, Leah. So how do you decide whether a child needs to be at the Cavendish School as opposed to Impington with the special needs support available? And what are the advantages of being at the Cavendish over being at IVC with the special needs help?
So I think that the important thing to note really from that question is that Impington Village College and the Cavendish School are two completely separate schools. So as much as they are co-located and they're within the same trust, they will be two separate schools with two separate head teachers and two separate kind of application processes. So they are separate schools. And also one of them is obviously a mainstream school. So Impington Village College is a mainstream school and the Cavendish is going to be a specialist provision. So because of one of them being a mainstream school and one of them being a specialist provision, that's where the two big differences really in terms of the schools come from. So we don't foresee any students who are coping well in mainstream. So for example, currently we have about 40 students at Impington who have autism, and we don't perceive any of those students as wanting or being in line to kind of move over to the Cavendish when the Cavendish opens, because they're doing well in their mainstream settings and there's no need to do that. So if you're kind of weighing up Impington or the Cavendish, then I think possibly maybe come in for a visit to Impington, come and see what we offer, and we can have a conversation about the Cavendish as well, because they are very different provisions, and we don't want students who can cope well in mainstream and who are managing well in mainstream to be kind of all leading their mainstream schools and applying for the Cavendish. As it's a special school, the idea is that the students in that school would be students who aren't able to cope or wouldn't be able to cope within that mainstream environment. Clearly there's advantages and disadvantages to both, and I know there's lots of arguments about special school versus mainstream school, and lots of people have kind of different opinions about that. obviously, as you know, as the person who asked the question said, at the Cavendish the class sizes are very, very small. So possibly, you know, about 8 to 10 students per class, whereas obviously at Impington most of the classes have about 30 students. We're also generally just a smaller school in terms of the Cavendish having 80 students and Impington having 1,400. Not to mention the fact that the Cavendish has been designed in particular with students in mind who would struggle with the physical environment of a mainstream school. So students who might academically be able to attend mainstream but wouldn't be able to cope with the physical environment. Perhaps it might cause them anxiety. Perhaps they have lots of sensory sensitivities that would mean that that's not appropriate. Those students might be better supported in the Cavendish School, or will be better supported in the Cavendish School. So they're two very different propositions, and I would suggest that if anyone's confused about kind of the difference between the two schools, then just get in touch and come and have a look around Impington and see what we can offer.
Brilliant. Leah, would you envisage a child transitioning from the Cavendish to IVC if it looked like they could cope?
So I think if there was a student in the Cavendish who was making really, really good progress, and the family and the professionals involved felt that they wanted to explore a mainstream school, then that is absolutely something that we could do. And we really hope, you know, I often think if I'm doing my job really, really well, then I'm going to be out of a job, because all of the students will have gone elsewhere and kind of will have moved on and gone on to different places, you know, especially when you think about transitions to sixth forms and things like that. So, you know, I would hope that there are students who are making really excellent progress at the Cavendish School, and that allows them to then go on to other either mainstream providers, mainstream sixth forms, whatever that may look like. If the most appropriate placement for them out of all of the mainstream schools is Impington, then the staff at the Cavendish and the local authority would request that place from Impington, the same as any other kind of mainstream school. So again, it's two separate schools, and there would have to be an application process the same as there would be if they were to move to a different mainstream school in the local area.
Brilliant. Okay. And following on from that question, Leah, how beneficial do you think it might be to be in Impington in a mainstream school for the first year of secondary before transitioning or being able to enter the Cavendish?
So as I said, because they're two separate schools, there's not kind of going to be an agreement in place that we can kind of easily move students across from Impington over to the Cavendish. It would have to be through the formal application process, the same as for any other student. However, we are very experienced at Impington in terms of supporting students who have additional needs, not just autism, a whole range of different additional needs. So as a mainstream school, I think that that young person would be very well supported and is more than welcome to come around and have a visit. But it doesn't necessarily mean that makes it easier to sort of transition them across into the Cavendish, because they are two separate schools and we would have to follow the formal kind of application processes.
Brilliant. Okay. And Julie, what do you think the benefits are of this co-location between Cavendish School and IVC?
In terms of them being co-located, the real potential there is in that physical proximity. You have this small school, a small special school with 80 pupils, just a few hundred yards away from a much larger mainstream secondary school. The main benefit there is that you've got a larger staff with much larger subject teams, you've got specialisms that you're just not going to find within a smaller staff of a small school like the Cavendish. So how that might play out will depend entirely on the head teacher and the teaching team, but it's about looking at the needs of the individual students within the Cavendish School and looking for how to exploit the potential of having these specialist staff. You've got specialist equipment, you've got facilities like the swimming pool, you've got trampolines, you've got netball courts, you've got photographic specialism with the right kind of equipment, media studies equipment, things like this. So it's a starting point. That co-location means that it's very easy for those staff to both explore the potential, to have a conversation about what might be available to support a particular student in their needs and in their interests as well. Because one of the things you can do is take the interests of the student, what they're interested in terms of what they prefer to spend their time on, and their particular interest, and also their interest in terms of what they might want to do in the future. And you can look at ways to build on that expertise. But it is just a starting point, having that co-location, having those resources in terms of staff and facilities and equipment nearby. What I think is the massive potential in this particular combination is in a shared culture, because you have in Impington Village College, you have a school that is extraordinary in its approach to inclusion, the way that the needs of the children within the school are considered at every level in every conversation. So within Impington Village College, you have staff that are used to taking a very broad view of the needs of particular children, to interpreting their behaviours and the way that they develop throughout school with an open mind, and allowing the students' needs to be met in the way that works best for them. That fits perfectly with the philosophy, the ideas, the approach to inclusion within the Cavendish School. So you have this great potential of having a large team that you get in a large school that are already thinking in the same way, approaching their teaching with an attitude to inclusion that fits with the philosophy of the trust as a whole, and also within the Cavendish. So I can't tell you exactly how that would work, whether a student might go over to and join a class at IVC. That may well happen. It may be that the staff draw on the resources, that they come up with a plan for a particular student that support the staff in the Cavendish. We don't know. That will depend on the needs of the children and the staff and the situation at the time. So, but what we do know is that there's massive potential for this co-location, and we're really excited to see how that's going to support the work of the Cavendish. Brilliant,
thanks Judy. And Ryan, if we think about the class sizes, what does the average class size look like at the Cavendish?
Well, actually, if you break it down just by the year groups, and then the number of students that we've been kind of built the school for and to admit, it will be about 8 students per class. But the reality is that it may be slightly more in some year groups, it may be slightly less in others. Whilst we've said we think we might take 8 year 7 in September, and then 8 students from year 3, 4, 5 and 6 as we move through towards January. The reality is it probably won't be that neat. And although when you're building a school and you're putting your funding and your stuff into the DFE, it's a spreadsheet and the computer tells you what you can put in each area. We know the reality from running schools isn't quite that cut and dried and straightforward. So I think it will be between 8 to 10 students. The model we're looking at is that there would be a classroom teacher, and then we'd be looking at teaching support assistants, probably looking at between one and 3 per class based on the level of need, and supporting the teaching and learning. And then, as Leah had alluded to before, we'll look at the cohort that we have and decide what specialist therapeutic provision we might want to recruit and retain ourselves based on the level of need we have in the cohort. So if we have a large number of students who would benefit from a speech and language therapist, we might look to recruit our own speech and language therapist. If we have only 1 or 2 students who might require physiotherapy, we wouldn't employ a physiotherapist, we would utilise the local authority or the health service to bring in a physiotherapist to support. So the benefit of this is of starting the school in this group is we can respond to our need and recruit our own staff, but because we're doing this alongside the local authority, we also have access to all of their professionals as we move forward.
Great. Back to you, Leah, please. Will the school also be making provision for students who have a more unusual profile of high functioning ASD?
Yeah, absolutely. So we expect that there will be a number of students who might apply who have some kind of co-occurring conditions, so maybe things like anxiety, ADHD, PDA. And as I said before, we're looking at supporting the students as individuals and in the way that they need to be supported. So we absolutely will be looking at how we can best train our staff, develop our knowledge in all of those different areas, and support those young people in the way that they need to be supported. We're very interested as well in supporting girls with autism, and in terms of the expressions of interest that we've had so far from girls, very roughly, because so far a lot of this has been informal expressions of interest through the website, and it's sometimes unclear the gender of the student, but it's kind of in line with the national picture in that we've had probably about 4 times more boys or parents of boys express an interest in comparison to girls. So that's another area where we know that we're going to have to put in a lot of work to help those students to feel understood and supported, as they may well be in the minority at the school. I expect that those figures perhaps might change a little bit, but we do expect obviously that girls might be in the minority. There may well be other minorities within the school that we need to support specifically. There may be some students who don't identify with a particular gender at all, or as you said in the beginning, students with other co-occurring conditions as well, which we will need to take into account. So yeah, absolutely, we're looking forward to that challenge.
Brilliant, thank you. Ryan, what uniform are you planning to have at the Cavendish School?
This will help us keep to time. None.
Great.
So yes, we're not going to be looking at uniform. I think I'm much more interested in focusing on the wider aspects of education and the specific needs of the students rather than what they're wearing. I want them to wear whatever makes them comfortable to learn and to develop.
Brilliant, thank you. And Ryan, what will the school share their break and lunch times with IBC, or will they have an outdoor space that's completely separate?
So yeah, the Cavendish School will be a separate school site, and it will be contained, and there will be specific areas for them to have outdoor space. We're really lucky that the site is being developed on the border of the IBC playing field, so there'll be a large amount of open space available to the Cavendish School students, and then for sports and other things, they'll have access to the IBC playing field, sports centre, and other facilities as required. And that will be something, going back to the benefits of being co-located that Julie touched on, that there will be the ability to share some facility and resource. So in terms of site safety, play areas, the Cavendish site will be, unlike Impington, which is an open site, the Cavendish site will be a secure, enclosed site, but it will have a significant amount of open space because of where we've been able to locate it.
Brilliant, okay. And Leah, what therapists do you intend to have on site at the school?
So we fully expect that we're going to need the support of occupational therapists, physiotherapists, speech and language therapists, educational psychologists, possibly specialist teachers as well, and in fact maybe even a range of other professionals kind of as needed depending on the students' needs. As Ryan and I have already touched on, in terms of what that looks like practically, whether they are on site however many days a week, or whether they're our members of staff, or whether we are accessing NHS or local authority staff members, we're not sure, and it will be very flexible depending on the cohorts that we have moving through the school. But we are very much looking forward to working with a really wide range of professionals to support the students.
Brilliant. I know we touched on the curriculum briefly in the presentation, but Leah, how does the curriculum work and the levels of qualifications? If you could just run through that again.
Yeah, so in terms of the levels of qualifications, and I know lots of people have asked about GCSEs, and lots of people have asked about the term kind of high functioning, in terms of, are we only expecting to have high functioning students? I think that's a term that back in 2017 may well have been mentioned, but it's something that we have very much moved away from, and is something that we're not using at the moment. We're not using anymore to refer to the students that we're expecting to have. What we do expect is that students who access the Cavendish or attend the Cavendish, broadly speaking, will be academically working at a level similar to mainstream peers, but bearing in mind that mainstream schools do have a whole range of needs within them as well. But that for whatever reason, those students aren't able to access the mainstream school, perhaps because of anxiety or because of the environment that the school is in. So generally speaking, we would be expecting at the end of year 11 students to be possibly working towards some GCSEs, even if that's a very small number of GCSEs, possibly in areas that they're interested in, alongside kind of other appropriate qualifications that are relevant to their level. So that might be entry-level qualifications, which we use a lot at Impington. That might be something like looking at ASDAN, which is kind of a unit-based award, rather than kind of having terminal exams. So very much kind of looking to tailor the actual qualification towards the students. But at the same time, we are very aware that we want the students to make good progress, and we do want them to leave with some qualifications. And so it's having a focus on both them leaving with appropriate qualifications, but also feeling very well supported and not necessarily having that kind of huge amount of pressure to achieve X, Y, and Z grades.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And Ryan, could you please expand on why the Cavendish has chosen the IB as the curriculum?
I think there are a couple of reasons why. I think the first would be around wanting to root our educational provision in a really well-established educational philosophy that we believe in. And as Leah alluded to, at IBC, we've been delivering international baccalaureate curricula for 30 years. I think there's real benefit in a broad and balanced curriculum, but the IB curriculum is such that it's based around developing particular traits in young people. The IB referred to as their learner profile. So encouraging young people to be thinkers, to be risk takers, to be caring, to be creative. And we can mould a curriculum that works around that. We do that in the mainstream setting. We do it in our football scholarship programs at post-16, where students do language acquisition, but they do it through a study of the Spanish football structure and La Liga. We've done it in the main school in IVC, where we've done cookery, but based around French culture and Spanish culture. So the IB curriculum, whilst being very well established and broad, is also extremely flexible and allows it to be tailored to meet the individual needs of a young person. So things like learning through play or forestry school could be things that could be really easily incorporated into an IB framework. And so that's the first reason, a very philosophical one and about expectations in the curriculum. The other is a practical one, and Leah and Julia both alluded to this, that if we align our curriculum to a greater or lesser extent with IBC, that means that potential for cross-school leadership, cross-school opportunities is really enhanced. And the word potential is really important there, because that will be very specific to the individual student. So it may be the case that you've got a young person who's particularly exceptional at, let's say, photography, for example, and they are able to cope with going and joining a class and a cohort in year 10 and 11 to study photography at IBC. That's great, and we could incorporate that. On the other hand, that young person might be absolutely fantastic and passionate about photography, but isn't able to go and join that group. But the leadership and experience of delivering that course can be transferred over to allow flexible delivery within the Cavendish. And that's just something that you're not going to get in other special school environments, because as Julie said, you're just not going to have the leadership capacity experience for the breadth of subjects that we offer. So a young person at the Cavendish has the opportunity, if when we're designing their curriculum, reviewing it, to study any of the 30 plus GCSEs that are on offer in the main school, or any of the 40 plus subjects that are on offer at post-16. So it's the potential and the flexibility that it gives. So that's the kind of practical, logistical reason why, and then there's the philosophy side of it as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And for those families that might be wondering how you would manage exam stress, because the IB is known for being academically rigorous, how will you plan to do that?
So we do a lot at IBC already to support young people with stress around exams. But I think, to take it back, the decision on whether to take exams or not will be driven by the young person's ability to manage that process. And even at IBC, where we're held very accountable for outcomes, we make decisions year on year, Leah and I and Victoria now, about whether or not to put young people into examinations based on discussions with them and their parents. You know, so we've had young people who've chosen to sit exams because they want to be part of their cohort and be seen the same as others, who we put in for examinations who we knew weren't going to achieve those grades, but for their well-being and sense of self, that was really important. On the other side, we've withdrawn young people right up to the very last minute when we've decided in discussion with parents and that young person that it's going to cause them unnecessary stress and anxiety. So the short answer is we'll be very flexible. We'll put the things in place to support those young people who want to take qualifications, and it's appropriate to do so, but we're never going to be in a position that we're going to put young people in those positions when we don't have to. We've avoided it in a mainstream school for many years where the pressures to do so are vast. We're not going to start doing it in a special educational setting where we don't have those same pressures.
Great, thank you. So moving on from that, Julie, how are you going to engage with the most recent and up-to-date research at the Cavendish?
Thanks, Sophie. That's actually a really easy one to answer. What we're going to do is we're going to go and find the people who spend a huge part of their working day engaging with the most up-to-date research and carrying out that research. So these are the researchers, the PhD students, who and ask them what's coming out of the research that they're doing, the reading that they're doing, and even before that, the studies that are being planned, the data collection that's happening. And we did that in 2018, 2 years ago, with our discussion forum. We invited a number of experts within the field, including PhD researchers and from the University of Cambridge, and they really kindly came and shared their work with us, and they've continued to do so. Now that's one of the roles I do during my day job, combined with student support work. So it's having those connections, knowing where to go and who to ask. We don't have a teaching team, does not have time to keep reading. They have training as part of their work, and they'll have ways of keeping up to date. But we really believe that the way to get the best possible access to the best possible ideas is to really bring those different worlds together. So yeah, so the short answer is we'll stay up to date with current research, because we will be involved with talking to the people doing the research, and actually what will happen is it will evolve into whatever collaborations make most sense, that produce even better research and target the research at the things that we need to know more about for our students.
Fantastic, thanks. So Leah, do you have any behaviour policies that you will follow?
You can probably guess what I'm about to say now, having listened to all of my previous answers. We will, of course, have a behaviour policy, a broad behaviour policy, but actually, ultimately, what we're going to be wanting to put in place is specific behaviour plans for students, dependent on their needs and dependent on what works for them. So we're not going to be having any kind of broad brushstrokes, all students will do this, all students will do that, or all teachers will do this in every situation. Clearly, there's going to need to be a lot of flexibility, a lot of co-production needed to make sure that the specific plans that we have in place for students are what works best for them as individuals, and within the classes that they're in and the context that they're in as well, with the peers that they have with them. We aren't planning on following any kind of particular approaches, so ABA, teach, anything like that. We're not planning on having one particular approach that we then apply broadly across the whole school. What we are looking to do is to draw on, like Julie was saying, and like we've been talking about throughout this presentation, is looking to draw on different elements of research and different aspects of things that work for various individuals, and applying those to individuals in whichever way we kind of see fit, and kind of monitoring those, reviewing those, making changes as needed. So in terms of a general kind of broad behaviour policy for all students, not really, no.
Brilliant. Okay. Back to Ryan, please. Do you anticipate the school being full next year, or do you think you will expand over time?
I think, yes, we will be full. I think the chances of us not being are very slim, so I think we will have 40 students in place and at the Cavendish School from January 2022, and that will grow gradually over the autumn term, as I said, starting with year 7, because their transition is the most, needs to be dealt with first, and then gradually with other students. And then we'll grow year on year. That's the model that was approved by the Department for Education, that we'll gradually grow year on year. Whether that in reality will be us growing vertically with just students coming in at year 3, I think, again, I alluded to it before, that when you bid to open a school with the Department of Education, it's quite a formulaic process. We know in reality that it probably won't be quite as smooth as that. And I imagine we will get bulges in different year groups. We might be asked by the local authority to take students who we might not have planned to at certain ages. And provided we can meet their needs, and it comes back to that really, if it's deemed through the EHCP review process and by the local authority that the Cavendish School is the best place to meet a young person's need based on the provision we have at that time, then we will be led by them.
Brilliant. Okay. Back to Julie. Are there any areas and rooms such as relax and play environments which students from all year groups can use if needed?
Yes, there are. The design features, if you look at the actual plans, there are specific rooms identified on the plans, but the whole design is specifically targeted to create the kinds of spaces that support relaxation, that support play, which could be, that play can be interactive, it can be using equipment, but also play can be solitary and quiet. So there are different environments that will support a whole range of activities. We don't know exactly what activities are going to be happening at what time, in what spaces, with which year groups, because that will evolve as the school gets going. So the design of the school has created a range of spaces, smaller spaces, larger spaces where children can get together, and all through the process we've been thinking about meeting sensory needs of our students with autism. We've been thinking about the social needs, and we've been thinking about the kinds of activities that we see happening in successful schools for children with autism, and also the kinds of activities that we anticipate being part of meeting their needs. So you can have a look at the plans online, and that will give you an idea, but what is more important is that there are a range of spaces. So the answer is yes, there are most definitely play spaces and relaxation spaces.
Brilliant, thank you. And our final pre-submitted question is back to Ryan. So will the Cavendish School look to establish lines of communication with organisations like Red to Green for the purposes of sharing expertise?
Yes, is the answer. I think I'm hopefully meeting Red to Green after half term, and I know we've been reaching out to another couple of organisations who we're keen to engage with, and we already have some well-established links with organisations like the National Trust at Anglesey Abbey, who support our post-16 enhanced resource learners here at Impington, and we'd be looking to expand those. But I'd encourage anyone who's joined us today who has links with organisations that they think could really support us in providing an excellent experience and provision to get in touch. I'd be very happy to meet with people and to network in that regard. We want to draw on as much expertise and resources as we possibly can.
Brilliant, okay. Fantastic. So that was all of the pre-submitted questions. I am aware of time, and we've had lots of questions come in. We can either look to answer a couple now, or we can answer them after the event. We can download them, and we'll get back to all of the questions in the next couple of days.
I think, Sophie, we've got, what, a minute and a half, maybe?
Minute and a half,
2 minutes. Yeah. I don't want to seem to be playing favourites and just pick one, perhaps.
Yeah.
So maybe it would be best if we took them all, and then between Leah and Julie and I, we will respond, and that would be a good opportunity to open up dialogue with people as well.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, to all of those people that have submitted their questions on the chat functionality, we will get back to you in the next couple of days with your questions and answers. But thank you so much, everyone, for attending. We hope you found it interesting and insightful.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.